Hello everybody, this is Tip-Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down a ton of custom Magic the Gathering cards, giving you my thoughts on what they do, kind of explaining what they do, and just talking about where they would fit into Magic the Gathering, whether it's in Commander or, if it would be a good standard card, and I just basically talk about the card, maybe some improvements. Now, obviously, these are all not real Magic cards. This is all from a Reddit called r/custom magic, and it's just a super fun thing to do. I love spoiler season. It's fun to see all the new cards and think about, oh, how could I build this new commander? How could I use this card in a deck? And so I think it's fun to look at custom cards and think about it in the same way. Either way, before we jump into this, if you see any of these cards and you're like, ooh, I have some opinions on that, and maybe I don't share those opinions, leave them in the comments down below. Maybe I'm overvaluing a card, or making, a card seem less valuable than it really is. So, let me know. So why don't we jump right into the first card? Starting off, we have the Time Eater. Also, you'll be able to see the username of the person who made it in the upper left. Obviously, I didn't make any of these cards. I do have certain series where I have made the cards, but these ones I have not. Either way, it's a 6-cost mono-blue legendary creature slug wizard for 6. Sorry, a 6-cost legendary creature slug wizard 6/6 with trample, and says whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a clock counter on the Time Eater. And then, if it's not your turn, and there are 6 or more clock counters on the Time Eater, remove all clock counters from the Time Eater and end the turn. So, first off, I have one problem with this card. A 6/6 for 6 with trample in blue isn't super blue. That feels more like a green card, but the second part feels very blue, so maybe this is meant to be more of a Simic commander, but I think just removing the trample and maybe reducing it to a 5/6 would make this slightly more fair. But basically what this is going to do is, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you're going to put a clock counter on it, and then 6 or more clock counters, you're ending the turn. So this, first off, stops your opponent from really going off on your turn. If they have infinite mana, they can only cast 6 spells, and once they do, assuming they can't cast things at instant speed, the turn is ending. But also what this does is it kind of just occasionally lets you take an extra turn. Your opponent kind of has to make sure they pick their best spells, otherwise they're going to be wasting, turns. And so I think this is really interesting. Now, there are ways to manipulate it. For instance, at your end step, just cast an instant speed opt spell, and what will happen is, because you're ending the turn, they don't have the reminder text, all spells on the stack will be exiled, which means you're going to cast it. So I cast opt, then the trigger for Time Eater goes on the stack, put 6 counters on it. Oh, I have 6 counters, end the turn. So that opt that they casted is now being exiled. So it also can manipulate some other cards. So in some decks, this could actually be a benefit to your opponent if they have some weird effect that's like, gain control of target permanent at your end step, give it back, but you won't have an end step because the turn just ended. So this has some interesting, applications, but we'll have to see. Next, we have Planar Surveyor. It's a 1 white 1/1 creature human scout vigilance, and it says non-basic lands are legendary. So this is a very mean, kind of stacksy card, which white often has, but essentially, this obviously wouldn't be played in Commander, but in a non-Commander format, this means you have 2, steam vents. Well, now they are legendary, so you have to get rid of one of them. So basically, if someone has a lot of cards with the same lands with the same name that are not basics, they get sacrificed. However, if you're running basics, it doesn't really affect you. So you would throw this in a mono white deck that either doesn't run, anything besides just normal planes, or just runs one of something that's not a planes, but it's just kind of a mean card. But it is interesting. I don't know if we've really seen this much design. We've seen non-basic lands are mountains, but this kind of just says, nope, you only get one of them. So I think it's a lot more fair than a lot of other cards, but for one, this can be kind of devastating. Just poof, oh, that's one thing I might happen to do on my turn. So I think that maybe this could be a 2-cost 2/2 instead, but I don't know. Next, we have Lucalus, the Ever Prepared. It's a 4-cost blue and red legendary creature, wizard rogue 2/2. And it says, if you would cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you may, so you don't have to, instead pay its mana cost and exile that card from your hand with a void counter on it. Mana cost includes color. So, say you're about to cast a 6-cost, take an extra turn after this one, you can exile it instead, and it just gets exiled, and you do have to pay the mana, but then it says you may cast cards that you own from exile with void counters on them without paying their mana cost as though they had flash. So the idea is you take a sorcery that normally is, a sorcery, and you say, hey, everyone at the table, I have the sorcery, I'm going to exile it, and at any time, without paying its mana cost, I can cast it. So you're kind of like pre-paying for spells. It's kind of like pre-ordering something. You're pre-ordering the spell, and just any second, poof, it's entering the battlefield. So this could be, you know, a really interesting tactic of like, here's Blasphemous Act, which does like 13 damage to each creature. I'm going to pay 1 red, first off, right now when there are a ton of creatures on the board, because it gets cheaper for the more creatures that are on the board, and then it's always going to be exiled, so it doesn't matter that, you know, maybe there's less creatures on the board now, so it costs more. But, you know, just at any moment, you can hold that board wipe over everyone's head, and it's just a very powerful ability, and it's very interesting. And I think the flavor text says it all. It's my turn, and I think it's interesting. It does, you know, I don't know exactly why you would put an instant under here unless you're doing it at instant speed. Maybe, you know, you have a combo that goes off, but it requires like 20 mana worth of cards all on one turn. Well, here's a 5 mana card here that I can just pay for ahead of time and then get to use later. So I think it's actually a very cool card. Next we have Queen's Dismissal. It's a 2 blue, 2 blue, 2 blue for an instant. It says exile target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the amount of mana spent to cast Queen's Dismissal. So at its worst, this is a blue, blue, blue exile target spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, which is not great. At its best, I mean, I guess quote-unquote best, it is a 6 cost colorless counter spell that counters something with CMC 6 or less. I think that's a little weird. I think at least one of the blues should have been like an actual blue, not just 2 blue. Like, I think this works well. I would rather play a card that just lets me pay X. You know, Thassa's Intervention. Just let me pay an X, you know, 7 mana in X if I want to be able to do this. But I think that the effects that are always like based on the amount of mana you pay for it, and it's like optional how much mana you pay for the card. I think those are always really interesting. I just think that this card being a colorless counterspell, there are colorless counterspells, but I just think it's pushing it. Next, we have Mordecai, Storm Herald. It's a 2-cost blue legendary creature bird, 1/2 with flying, and whenever you scry, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So instantly, you're going to want to make a deck that just scries a ton, and maybe this is a Voltron commander deck, where, you know, you're scrying a bunch. You know, if you can scry at instant speed, it can be like, haha, combat trick, now all scries are combat tricks. And then you can also pay a red and remove 2 counters from it, and exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. This card, that's pretty good, saying that you're scrying, you're going to be able to put whatever you want on top of your library. Obviously not whatever, but if you scry like 4, you can manipulate what's going to be on top of your library for the next 4 turns, or at least 4 draws. And so I think this card just works really well together. It's not too overpowered, and it gives you something interesting to build around. I think this is masterfully designed. Next, we have Underworld Hydra. It's an X and a green for a creature Hydra, and it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and then it has escape X and a green, and it says exile X other cards from your graveyard. So what's interesting about this one is that it's kind of a variable escape cost, which is something we really haven't seen. It's always been, you know, escape 2, escape 3, you know, not this, like, it's not this like variable where it's like, oh yeah, it's a Hydra. And what's interesting is that since it has X, it like actually works like a real Hydra but with escape, and I like the way this is designed. Next, we have Nemesis, the Meat Guard. It's 1 white, black, green for legendary creatures, Zombie Elephant, 3/3. So 3/3 for 4. That's hard to cast. This probably has a big and good ability then. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature is a 1/1, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So instantly, you just want to play a bunch of 1/1s, or more probably create a bunch of token creators, because, you know, this doesn't say non-token. And it says at the beginning of your unstep, return target 1/1 creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, couple issues I have with this card. First off, it would probably not say target 1/1. It would probably say target creature with base power and toughness 1/1. But aside from that, I think that bottom ability is insanely overpowered. You know, you might be saying, oh, it's just a 1/1, but I'm sure, obviously I don't have every single card in front of me, maybe there's not, but I'm sure there's probably some high CMC spell that has power 1 and toughness 1, but that's just as a balancing act, or maybe it starts as a 1/1, but then gets a ton of boost when it's on the battlefield from something. Maybe it normally costs like 8. So, like, you know, an example of which would be like Gigantomancer. It's a 8-cost green creature, human shamans, 1/1, and you can pay 1 mana, and target creature you control becomes a 7/7 until end of turn. So, and that's in this guy's colors, and that was just one quick search on Scryfall was able to come up with that. So I think that it's too overpowered, just that bottom ability. There are cards like Tristani Summoner, who creates a 4/4, a 3/3, and a 2/2, which you're probably already playing a token deck based on this, so I think it just is a little bit too good. I could be wrong, though. Next, we have Valley of Heroes. It's a land, and it says, as it enters the battlefield, pick a color in your commander's color identity, and then you can add 1 mana of the chosen color. So it's not like Command Tower, where we can tap for any color on any turn, so it's clearly worse than Command Tower, but it is good for color fixing. Say you're playing a Joda deck, and the purpose of the Joda deck is to get to Wooburg and cast things. Say you're missing green, this now is a forest, so it's like a worse version of Command Tower, and I think it works really well. Next, we have Bestwick the Kingmaker. It's a white, black legendary creature, human advisor, 2/3, and when it enters the battlefield, an opponent of your choice becomes a monarch. So, kind of different than normal, but if you would become the monarch, an opponent of your choice becomes the monarch instead. So you can't become the monarch, but you can manipulate who is the monarch. And then at the beginning of each player's end step, if that player is the monarch, they sacrifice a creature and lose 3 life, and you draw a card. So you are saying, hey, I'm going to make you the monarch, but I am going to make you sacrifice creatures, lose life, and draw cards, and even if I'm hitting you, you are still the monarch, which means that if they care about being the monarch, that's pretty big and probably not a good thing. But this also kind of works as a, political deck where it's like, hey, you want to become the monarch, I'll give you the monarch, and then you can easily swing an attack and get the monarch, and there's lots of different things you can do here, and because you can't become the monarch, you can't be negatively affected, and this is drawing you a lot of cards. I really like the way this works. I just wish there was a little bit more incentive for someone to be the monarch. Drawing an extra card each turn with the cost of sacrificing a creature, losing 3 life, and making an opponent draw a card is not good. So people don't want to be the monarch, which I think you need to make them kind of want to be the monarch, but I think this card is fine. Next, we have Aether String Serenade, sorry. It's a 5-cost white and blue enchantment, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you gain life equal to that spell's converted mana cost. So maybe you cast a 1-drop and then maybe 7-drop, and you gain 7 life, but that's not great for a 5-cost enchantment. But whenever you cast your third spell each turn, you draw cards equal to that spell's converted mana cost. So here's where it's going crazy. Now, this definitely goes in a Storm deck. Think about it like this. You want to cast a bunch of small things. And I know, 5 cost, maybe that's a little too high for Storm decks, and you'd need to include white, and if we're talking about commander here, Mizzix is a pretty good commander for Storm decks, but you cast your third spell. If it's like a 3-drop, you're still drawing 3 cards. So this is a pretty good card. As long as you're playing a 3-drop as your third spell, you are making up all the cards you cast that turn. So I think it might be a little too powerful, but then again, when you cast it, it does nothing. Although it could be your second spell of a turn, or your first spell of a turn, and then you could get and cast things later on that turn, and it'll be interesting to see, it won't be interesting because no one's actually played this because it's a custom card, but it would be interesting to see how this would do. I'm not sure. And that's it for all of the custom cards. These were overall really fun. Some of them had a little bit of wording, a couple issues with wording. Some of them were a little too powerful. Some of them were a little weak. But, overall, it's really fun to look at custom Magic cards, and I'm excited to see what you guys think of them as well. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.